Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Ex-professional podcast with your host, Zach Villeneuve-Snell. In this week's episode, I am joined by Rick Cooper, who is an ex-professional rugby player who, after 10 years in the fire service, now travels the country, delivering workshops and talks for young men in the independent school circuit, teaching them about what it means to be a man in the 21st century. In this episode, we touch on Rick's abusive relationship with his father, how the school system let him down as a child, and a brief history of the psychology of man. We talk about the current crisis in masculinity, how figures have arisen to fill this void, but how damaging their message can be. And in particular, Rick touches on the need to balance vulnerability and being capable and dangerous. This podcast truly was a pleasure to record. Rick is an absolute legend who is making a real impact in the lives of boys and young men, and I cannot stress how important this episode is to me. So with that in mind, whether you're tuning in for the first time or the 20th, I'd encourage you, if you take something away from this, please do share it in a group chat with friends or work colleagues, or share it to your social media pages, as I'd love to be able to spread this message as far as possible. Without further ado, Rick Cooper.
We basically live in a generation of men and boys who are dogs. Put on a lead, taken off, got no idea where to be, what direction to go in. We become lost and start to feel more suppression and more anger because they're being told you're the problem. They mean really well. I think the problem is everything has a connotation to unconscious toxic shaming. I made the deal with myself that I'm not going to stop running until I can't. I remember being found in hospital twice where I'd passed out. The Industrial Revolution is the biggest turning point because what we create is separation. We are willing to be humiliated just to feel like we belong to something. He deemed this as character building. He didn't really understand the psychological side this was playing. And 20 broke my back, lost the use of my legs. Young men need to understand why we are as we are.
Now, before we get started, let me quickly introduce the official podcast sponsor, Runner. As many of you may know, I am a keen triathlete myself, and I came across the founder, Ben Parger, a little over 2 years ago before the app had launched. It's a service I believe to be truly revolutionary, which is why I asked them to come on board as a podcast sponsor. So what is Runner? Well, Runner is the first of its kind, #1 rated, fully automated running coaching service. And whether you're training for your first marathon, a faster 10K time, or simply couch to 5K, you'll be guided by an expert team, including Olympic marathon runner Steph Davis. Download Runner, spelled RUNNA, today from the App Store and take your running to the next level. And of course, with code ZAK, ZAK, you'll get your first 2 weeks free to see what all the hype is about. Welcome to the show, Rick. How are you doing?
Zach, firstly, mate, thank you very much for, firstly connecting on LinkedIn and inviting me on. It's a real privilege. I'm really grateful for you to hold that space for me. So thank you very much.
I really look forward to this discussion. I often like to start these podcasts by asking the guest to introduce themselves. So rather than me sort of defining you based on your job titles, how would you introduce yourself in 2023?
Wow. So Rick Cooper, I guess what I do rather than who I am, what I do is in corporate speak, enhance performance and increase productivity. What I really do in the independent school circuit is engage and motivate young men in sport and education, really just help young men completely thrive as best I can with the tools I've learned and pass that down. I think it's just a very, innovative is what it's been described as, or pioneering way of what I do in giving boys life skills that can transcend in their academia, but for broader life. Because I think a lot of lip service gives a lot of, we take care of the kids beyond life at school. And then I go in and I'm like, okay, we're actually not equipping them with the life skills to do that. So I've kind of come in to try and collaborate and help and bridge that gap for the schools with the young men. So yeah, in a quick nutshell, that's what I do. Who I am, I'm a father to a nearly 8-year-old young man, husband to a beautiful wife, got my own dog, would be who I am, so the roles I play outside my profession. And just love being in nature, love using my body and whatever that comes these days, and just connecting with like minds.
Fantastic, and I can't wait to delve into that more a little bit later on. As you mentioned there, I kind of connected with you on LinkedIn. Must have been a mutual friend or connection that kind of reacted on your post, and I'm really glad. It really resonated with me what I saw. It was you, I think, stood in a classroom of boys talking about that healthy expression of masculinity, what it means to be a man, and being proud to be male. Just for the listeners' benefit as well, as I mentioned, this topic has become something that I'm really passionate about. I have a friend building an app helping children's mental health in schools. I want to pursue clinical psychology myself and kind of grow into being a role model as I kind of get older. And so I'd love for this discussion today to be grounded in the idea of healthy masculinity and the debate around what it means to be a man. As we've heard all too often in like recent media and online, these toxic ways that it can be expressed and all this whole kind of discussion around it. So to kick things off, I'd love to get your take on what it means to be a man. Going straight in with the hard questions.
Man after my own heart. I like going straight in and being direct. I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like the messaging's always, I think people are trying to do good. They're trying to help guys and young men with a message or workshops or talks, whatever it is, with them. They mean really well. I think the problem is everything has a connotation to unconscious toxic shaming. So it's all about equality. It's all about toxic behaviors. It's always about toxic masculinity. So we're always telling men what not to be or giving them examples of, like, for instance, equality. Like, I'm not in debate. Like, equality is a no-brainer for me. You know, I've served in the fire service with women, with, you know, across my whole life. And I completely understand it. So for me, it's a no-brainer. But when we say, we should have equality because men have done this and men have done that, and this is how we make it good, it's always an unconscious toxic shaming. And all we do is we create almost like another divide. So rather than touch the hearts of like 10 guys in a room over a subject where they can connect, we have one person that connects with that, while the other 9 start to feel more suppression and more anger because they're being told you're the problem. And I think my take on that is, and how I deliver my masculinity talks, especially in the schools, is this is why we're like we are. Let me show you the psychological confused map of man for the last 10,000 years, how we've come into the universe in fear because we were primal. So it was all about, we knew who we were, what our role was. It was defined automatically. We had a body to use. We had nature to connect with. We realized very quickly that nature serves us. We serve nature. Our primary emotion in life was fear, because it was, we need to survive. To survive meant that we need to come together to look after our food, look after our cattle, look after the animals, because the more we look after them, the long run is to look after us. We need to find shelter. We need to defend ourselves. That was basically how we worked. I'm going to go off on this, Zach, so pardon me on this, mate, because I'll just go off on touching quickly on what I do with the guys and the boys is letting them see that first emotion is all about fear. We move into tribe and community, which is broad, it's big. You know, everyone has purpose in there. And what I talk about with this is, those years ago, it wasn't man do this, woman do that. It wasn't hierarchical. It wasn't power. It wasn't any of the stuff, you know, the crap that's out there today. It's a certain someone. I don't like talking about him. The initials AT, but I don't like talking about him because as we move through, and especially with the young boys, there's a real big, deep challenge in the schools around this person, and they want to magnify the person rather than magnify what his message should be, which is what I'm trying to go in to do. And as we run through this map, I talk about community, and everybody was equal. You know, it's only us as humans, as we've, in inverted commas, evolved, that we've created divide. We've used the abuse of power to create manipulation, to create division and a competition, not only amongst each other, but sex versus sex. And all those years ago, it wasn't there. It was like, we realized that you're good at this, I'm good at that, so I'll do this, you do that. We mix together, we work together, you know, for the broader outcome of our community. So it was about love, it was about belonging. And we move from that. And as time transcends, Zach, we go into trading through farming, which brings us into mini tribes or family. So what that causes is, although family is what we need to cling on to now, back then that was the start of separation from each other. Was we start to create family over community. So we start to shift from, it takes a community to raise a child, a boy or a girl. And we recognize that's a wholeness, it's a bigness, it creates belonging, and we move into family. That comes with pressure because we take away the elders. So in our Western world, what we do is kick our elders into homes. We move away from them. We deem them to be useless to us and a burden. Whereas we go to other cultures, Maori culture, anything like that. Some of my rugby friends who are Maori will go, you Westerners have it so wrong. Like, we absolutely rever our elders. They come and live with us when they get to an age where they need taken care of, because they have so much use for us with the wisdom they have, with the foresight they have, with the calmness in their energy and the demeanor that we need to surround ourselves with in this crazy world. And they're like, you Westerners have it nuts. You're selling breathwork courses or meditation courses, and you're basically training yourself in these areas to then sell that to someone else. Whereas in Maori culture, in our culture, it's a given. Like, we connect with nature, we breathe slowly. No one's trying to profiteer off each other through these deemed new sciences because they've been around for centuries. Yet you lot kick everything into the curb or try and profiteer from each other on the back of the culture you're living in. And it was like, wow. Like, when I learned that, it was so mind-blowing for me, because I was like, it's so right, it's so true, and I know it to be true. And part of me is like, God damn, I'm part of this stupid movement in the Western world where, you know, we're trying to look for these people to come in. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, the trouble with the Western world is we manipulate to do things to create a living for ourselves, because basically there is a need. We are utterly stressed. We are suffering with an anxiety pandemic, and we need people to come forward and go, okay, yeah, like, I basically need a living, because that's how we're set up in the Western world. And I'll go and learn a tool from back when to bring to the world now in where I live, in this environment, to help you. So in one regard, I sit there and think, okay, yeah, we have got it so wrong. But at the same time, there's people of light who have gone, yeah, we have, but needs must right now. And I'll do what's required. I've come off topic a little bit, mate, but if we go back for that journey, it's allowing the boys especially to see how this has unfolded, that family and mini tribe together was the start of bartering and trading. It's like, you plant seeds for, you plant seeds for bread. I'll create malt and we'll have whiskey. You give me that, I give you this. But unconsciously, what we create with that is almost the start of competition, because what we have then is debate. My bread, you're getting more bread for what you're giving me whiskey. So you do this. And from that, we then go into science, and science then brings us into the creation of data, resources. Science starts to create the first elements of a bit of competition. And with science, then quickly follows the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution is the biggest turning point in humankind, because what we create is separation. Because the father separates from the home. We deem now that some bright light suddenly cuts their piece of paper off the tree and goes, oh, hold on a minute. With this one piece of paper, I'll cut it into 4, and I'll put a 5 on one, a 20 on another, a 10 on another, a 50 on another piece. And we'll paint it with the same ink. And what we'll do is we'll convince all these people, all these human beings, that the 50, even though it's used the same ink on the same paper, we'll convince everybody that means more than the 5. And we can create division through competition. And we can create a real divide through self-worth, through job, and separate them from what actually matters in their life. And we'll put them in factories to earn these pieces of paper and separate them from all their life, so they start to measure themselves against this piece of paper, otherwise known as money. And the father separates from the home. And what comes with that now is men's loss of identity. We've lost being on the floor, playing with the children in the community. We've lost the ability to initiate young men in the world, because our initiation processes were always, like nowadays, initiation is linked to humiliation. So you load university, we go to rugby clubs, sports, anything like that. And your initiation to be part of that is always linked to humiliation. Whereas back then, the initiation was growth. It was, you'll be initiated through doing a task of hardship where you will grow as an individual. And once you've gone through that hardship of growth through tasks that the elders set, and you're welcome to community, they deliberately set the initiation processes for you to learn about yourself, but also that when you come back into the community, the elders go, we will now bless you as a man, not a boy, because you've shown that you are a valid part of this community that adds so much value to us, that as we get older, we need youngsters young men to come through who are strong and capable and energetic and full of life, that we know you're going to protect and serve this community. So the women were at peace. The men were at peace because we've got boys now who've become men through arduous task of growth, through initiation. We separate the father. The elder men of the community have gone. They've lost all their purpose. They come home tired, knackered from being slogged for someone else's good in the Industrial Revolution. What we get with that is the first start of the suppressed female. Because once that's set up, a man leaves and he comes home with stress through this loss of purpose, loss of identity. We now have the first sign of suppressed female of, oh, I've got all these kids running around, and now I've got to take care of all this when I've always had my community with me, my family, my man in my life, my other fellow females. And now all of us are being told that man goes to work and woman stays at home. What comes with that is the start of power, where it's like man is then convinced that he earns money, so he must be the powerful one, because that money buys the food that was once grown on the crops by man and woman. But now man separates from everything. We create bitterness and emotion and stress, and we link that money that comes with it to then have to buy the things of basic survival need, food and water, into his family. So we move through that, and as we move through, we also we move from rural to urban, Zach. So we have the appreciation, you listen now, and I give this on the talks where I say to the boys, like, and even grown men, when I talk about this confused map of man, is we are willing to spend thousands to escape our life for 2 weeks on holiday. Where's that holiday? It's either connected to a beach, it's either connected to nature, it's connected to something like mountains through skiing. It's always connecting back, which we intuitively know where we are created from, where all our pieces. It's always connecting back to nature. And we come back to our normal life, and we'll happily get stressed out again when we move from rural living to urban living. And then we wonder why there's so much violence. Where's all the violence in the world? Cities. We're all crammed in like rats. Concrete jungles, where most of the violence occurs, because it's the suppression of the intuitive part of us is so pushed down that it comes out in anger, violence, rape, frustration, mental health issues, where we end up reclusing ourselves. So we move from rural to urban. We lose sacred initiation. Like initiation process start to become toxic, become humiliating. And we move from that into the technological age. So we start to look at this whole map and think, oh my God, now I can see this. The complete disconnection to each other, the complete disconnection to self, the ability we had that enhances well-being is when we can become independent. And now we're losing that. Like when I was at school, we still had a calculator and a pencil and a piece of paper. And it was like, if we did maths, you had to figure the whole thing out first on yourself and then check if you were right via the calculator. It's tiny, but we don't even have to do that anymore. Like I've got a son at school, and thankfully we still run him through that practice, but he doesn't have to do that anymore. No one even has to become what we deem useful anymore, because technology does it all for us. We don't have to resource anything that we want. It's literally at a touch of a button. We can literally sit indoors all day and never have to do anything anymore. Whether it's, we don't even have to go shopping to feed ourselves. We can have everything delivered to the front door. We can run a business from the phone. We literally can do everything. And then we convince ourselves we're connected. And then we go, yeah, we're really connected. Oh yeah, but we live in a mental health pandemic. The two are always linked. We lost all of our sense of belonging, because what we do is we are desperate to be part of something. And what we do is we'll sacrifice our values and what we stand for to belong, which is where sacred initiation's been lost. We are willing to be humiliated just to feel like we belong to something. And the techno revolution brings us into the confused map of man, because we're like, who am I? What is the identity of man? What's my purpose in life? Why am I actually here? I don't know. I'm lost. I'm down. I'm down. I question everything. What's my role? Men are frightened of responsibility now. because if we believe it to be weight. We'll go back 10,000 years. We thrived on responsibility. We should be looking for responsibility, but responsibility are the things we want to be in life. Like if you want to be a good father, it comes with responsibility. You want to be a good husband, it comes with responsibility. You want to be a good friend, it comes with responsibility. You want to be on purpose, it comes with responsibility. And we need to chase responsibility because it enables us to feel grounded and to grow and to be calm and clear. So in a real nutshell, yes, mate. Sorry, I probably went off on a tangent there, Zach, on a very quick rundown of the workshop and speeches I run, the psychological journey of man. But from that place, I'm able to explain like the four energies and the masculine and feminine and what they are within us. But I better let you talk before I go on to that.
Yeah, no, I think what I really liked about that introduction, and obviously I wasn't expecting that coming into that, asking that question, but I think you've given a really clear and concise overview of the development of man, and it's not something that I have particularly heard about. So I'm sat here just as interested as I hope that the listeners are, either listening or watching to this, because it's so easy to get so narrow-minded and so focused on the last 50 years or our own lifespan from when we were born to when we live now. And an appreciation for that history and how things were different gives us that context. And I think it's quite interesting you mentioned there that difference between connection and then feeling distant and lost, and the fact that you can have everything at your fingertips. I think that definitely speaks to the fact that a lot of the things that people are doing now, a lot of the things that people are selling, as you mentioned, are all just ways in which to get back to the original thing, connecting with nature that we knew, cold water exposure, going out and exercising, being in nature, all these things which are natural and then facilitate healthier dynamics, healthier mental health, etc. So I really like that overview just to kind of kick things off. Before we get slightly too much more into that whole space, I'm sure we'll talk about these sort of topics later on. I wanted to embed it a little bit in your own journey because it's obviously interesting to understand how you've come across this and how you've come to these conclusions in your own life. So I was reading somewhere that you were heavily involved with rugby and kind of took off on a professional career, but had a life-changing injury. So what was that all about? Could you take us through that process?
Oh, wow. Well, Zach, I was kind of 14 and decided that I wanted to be a professional rugby player. I really wasn't interested in school. I mean, funny enough, I had this conversation with my wife this morning in the dog walk, just talking about our school journey. And I just remember never really being interested. I mean, a lot makes sense now because everything I do is on male and boy psychology. But yeah, I never had an interest. There was no topic that lit me up. It was just something I had to do, was just go to school. I had no interest whatsoever. Everything just seemed boring, to be honest. Stuck in a classroom is not me. And I just loved rugby. It gave me connection. I could express myself. I felt free. I could connect. I could be wild. And we'll talk about that later, what wild actually really is compared to what we're brought up to believe. It just meant I could be myself. And at 14, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with myself? I remember having a careers interview and they're going, so Ricky, what are you going to do? And I was like, I want to be a professional rugby player. And they laughed because it still wasn't professional. It was 1995. It was just about to go pro. Now, what do you really want to do? And I said, actually, I remember my mate's dad was a quantity surveyor. Never a clue what it was, Zach. And I went, oh yeah, I'll be a quantity surveyor. And they're like, okay, this is the subjects you should do. So kind of took them subjects on. I was like, oh, whatever, I'm going to go pro. And at 16, I managed to go to Saracen's Academy. It was the first academy in the country and got accepted into that. And then at 18, kind of signed for them. And 20, broke my back. Lost the use of my legs. I was going through a very, very traumatic time. So just to give you some landscape on probably where my passion comes from for the men's work was, I grew up in a very toxic home, a lot of abuse. My mum beating up my dad, my dad beating up my mum, through physical violence. There was just verbal abuse. My dad come from what I learned later in life was a very toxic growing up environment. He just lived in that projection of what he learned. So from like 13, I was like quite overweight, and he would ridicule me in front of my friends, in front of my friends' parents. There were times when I thought he was going to help me. So I'm a big believer in trying to create psychologically safe and expressive environments, and how we do that through vulnerability. And my dad kind of like was my rugby coach, and he'd verbally abused me. And then I remember 13, him going about, oh, do you want to come for a run of an evening? So for me, it was like, yeah, so for me, it was a sense of belonging, sense of togetherness. And it was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And we went out like 7:30, winter's night, it's dark, I'm 13 years old. And about 10 minutes in the run, my dad just goes at his pace and he's going and going, and I'm falling behind. And I'm getting scared and fearful. It's dark. We're like on the edge of a woods. I'm playing all stories in my head. And he just goes, and I'm trying to keep up, trying not to cry, because I'm upset, because I've had this sort of safety within me that I'm going with my dad, as togetherness. This is like, this soft feeling in your stomach of acceptance. He's asked me, and then he just goes off, and I'm trying to breathe and run, and I'm trying not to cry because he's left me. And all I can do is try and keep up enough so I can try and keep within about 100 meters away to see the route we're going on. So if anything did happen to me, I hoped that I could shout. And lost him, managed to get on the straight route home, and got there and walked indoors, and he's there. And my mum's like, are you all right? And I was like, yeah, like try not to cry. And I literally walked in, tried to keep eye on my dad. He looked around and went, so where were you, fat shit? And I was just like, started to just swallow hard, because it was like, do I cry, or I'm steaming with anger right now? And he walked off, and I just like got some water, tried to choke back the tears. And then I went upstairs for a shower. He opened his bedroom door. He's like, you're not even going to do your press-ups and sit-ups? That's why you look like that? And it was like, okay, wow. And then this just escalated. This went on for like a few more years. It got on a grand scale, because he was our rugby coach as well. And it got onto quite a grand scale there, where he would do things like this in front of all my friends, all my peers. And when the parents were there watching on, he did a couple of things that were really humiliating. Partnered with, like, at that time as well, in school circuit, I remember having a private maths lesson, and a silent maths lesson, and going up to the teacher's desk when I didn't have a clue what to do with one of the questions. And she asked the class to look up, asked me to say the question out loud again. And then she said, oh, can you stand on my desk? And I stood on the desk, and she said, look up. And there was a piece of cotton coming from the ceiling in a noose. And she said, put your head through the hole, please. And I'm like, God, I think I must have been 10. And at that time, you didn't question these things. We weren't as outwardly vocal as kids are these days. You just kind of got on with it. So you put your head through it, and she says, can you say out loud to class backwards, red backwards? So I was like, duh. She went, you say it again? I was like, duh. She went, exactly. Get down off my desk, stop being so stupid, and go back to the question. So like there was this theme of humiliation amongst your peers from grown-ups, and it became a thing where I got a full authority of the teacher doing it. You go out, parents talk about it, and 30 years ago, this was like, get on with it. And that was generally the consensus of parents back then, was just like, yeah, whatever, just get on with it. That's what it was like. So for me, it was like, this is just a part of growing up. You just get on with it. And I had that with my dad, and it ended up boiling up when I was about 16. We had our first major punch up on a rugby pitch, where he deemed this as character building. He didn't really understand the psychological side this part this was playing. And I remember him coming in for forearm to my face during a touch rugby session, and I was just like completely shocked again of like what just happened. I've literally just had my nose smashed by my own father, and the red came up, and I'd held in for 3 or 4 years all this anger, and we ended up having a massive fight on the floor at the training ground. We had to be separated by a load of people. And I grew up with that. So that's part of it. I grew up with an uncle that from 8 or 9 years old would come round, get me in a headlock until I passed out. And then he'd say to my mum, you're bringing up a pussy. He's too soft. And this went on for years until I was about 14, and I punched him in the bollocks. And he was like, oh, like there was a shock, and he stopped. But what was happening, Zach, getting back to your original question, was this was harnessing so much anger around men. And it was harnessing this need to prove a point. To be accepted by men had to be that I had to physically dominate in some sort of area. Had to be that I had to prove myself constantly around men, in groups of men. So I'm always continually living a life of psychological instability, of safety in male-dominated environments, but my void was I craved it. My void in myself was I want to be in male environments, but I want to be accepted. So you have this paradigm of a polar continuum of the same axis of I'm really hurt, but I've also got a massive void. So I'm using the pain to fill the void in the end. So you go to Saracens, I break my back. that's like the end of my career. We go through a very, very rough time personally at that time as well, with my mum and dad separating. And I was just really lost in life. Had no one to lean on, 20 years old, everything I dreamed of had gone. My dad's out of my life now. So, and there's still this yearning for him to accept me, but at the same time I hate him at that time in my life. No solid men around me. And yeah, it was a very dark, dark time where I was feeling voids of drink or women or whatever else at that time. And I had the back operation. And yet again, I have a man deemed of authority. I had the back operation and it's a relief. I'm like, yes, I can fix myself. We're nearly 2 years after my rugby's ended. So I go to the surgeon 6 weeks later and I say, like, Doc, when can I go back to play rugby then? And he literally laughed at me at the desk. And he said, boy, it was that serious. You're not even going to stack shelves in Tesco's in your life. And again, the anger just come raising up inside me where another male of what I deem of influence, authority in my life, I've been shut down again. So I come out steaming, crying my eyes out because I'm just lost, identity crisis, don't know who I am, what I'm doing with my life. I don't understand what my purpose here is anymore. And I kind of reflected on that and I just thought, no, like I've got to shut. So again, the story comes up, Zach, where I'm like, I'll show you, man, that you are not going to dictate my life. I'll prove a point that I can be accepted, that I can belong, and it's going to have to come with the undercurrent of I'll have to prove myself physically again. So there's this complete story that just keeps coming up and coming up. And I got myself really, really fit, took myself some really dark places, went to a careers advisor, said, look, what can I do with my life? And she just goes, well, you can either go in the military or go in emergency services. And I was like, oh, sod it, I'll become a firefighter. So I applied for London, and this is where competition comes in, where it can become unhealthy. And so it's in a confused map of man that with education comes competition. 10,000 years ago, our competition wasn't against each other. It was if the men and the boys of our community was on the floor wrestling, it wasn't I beat you or you beat me. It was, I will teach you and beat you because I need you to grow to beat me and use the teachings because we're here together to protect ourselves from animals that want to fight us. Whereas as education came in, competition became about you versus me. It became about sets and everything else, which then comes into self-worth, and it became the great divide again. And I bring that in what I recognized in myself 20 odd years ago was my mindset was you're all competition. And it was like, whether as a male trying to get female attention, it was, I'll be the alpha because you're competition, I want her. Or if we're playing sport and I'm with my friends, it's like, I want to be more than you are because if you're more than me, I'm not good enough. And basically that came out of the fire service. I knew that at the time it was the most popular job in the country to be applied for. And I think it was something like 2,000 applicants for one vacancy. So in my head, I was like, okay, I'll control the controllable. I remember putting bin bags on, like 5 bin bags in July and August with tracksuit bombs and jumper and running until I made the deal with myself that I'm not going to stop running until I can't. And I remember being found in hospital twice where I'd passed out on like 2 runs and stuff just to get myself fit for the fire service. Because I was like, I want to beat everybody. I want to prove a point. And we'd go for the fitness test. Really obliterated it. Which was great. I outrun a bleep test. I think only David Beckham at the time was the only other person recorded of doing it. And I managed to do that. And it doesn't mean anything now. Like at the time, I was like, yes, like no one's going to touch me kind of thing. And I got in and went to the fire service and spent 10 years there. But it's the first place I felt like home. Like I got in. And as I got in, I remember my first day and a guy called Joe was on my watch. And I came in at 25. He was about 44. And I remember him coming up to me, putting his arm around me, and he said, Rick, you're part of us now. He said, so any help you need, we're going to help you. You're part of us. We'll help you with whatever you haven't learned at training school to be a part of our team. And I was like, oh my God, like I've not been in this environment before. I've been in sport environments where it's completely cutthroat. It's sports, not only is our team versus that team, sport is also linked to psychological spaces of fear. Like that, most sports environments are always created on fear. Like fear of winning a contract, fear of losing your position to someone else, being told every day, oh, someone's working harder than you, got to do more. It's always based on fear. And I came to the first place where I'm surrounded by men, and I walked in the door and they just accepted me. And I got to be part of a team to work for a far greater good than a sports result. It's to preserve and save life and help people. And all of a sudden, everything just started to change. Because it became a male-dominant environment where you could just be yourself as long as you became a good team member for the greater good. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, it felt like I'd found all the answers to my life at that time.
I think that really speaks to the kind of message that you share now with young men in terms of that brotherhood and that surrounding yourself with men in that safe space to then hopefully grow and be vulnerable in it. And it kind of speaks to that difference as well, that generational difference between the toughening up and lack of vulnerability, kind of like summing up all of the stories of humility that you kind of described there that was a common theme. And I think it takes a lot of introspection and a lot of work to rewind a lot of those things and those learned beliefs and those self-limiting beliefs as well, as I know you kind of touch on in some of your talks. And I think breaking that cycle where maybe your parents were only acting based on the information that they had learnt about parenting from their parents, and it kind of like keeps stepping down and down, as you quite nicely described at the beginning, as a product of all of these like new environments post-industrial revolution. And so I think it's interesting to sort of link those things together and then see how when you were then finally placed into an environment where it was supported and you could grow and you had that purpose that was beyond your own personal ambition, it was saving lives. I think that speaks also to the importance of placing something, whatever that might be, above yourself and serving others rather than being self-serving, which I think is an increasingly big thing in society where we're told that we can, everything is about ourselves, we should serve ourselves. If something isn't serving us, we should leave that environment. And yes, there's a time and place for it, but I think it's often not talked about enough, that kind of posture of a serving heart, which is where most fulfillment is obviously then found. You mentioned obviously the kind of lessons and that journey from the firefighting. What was it that then led you to transition away from the firefighting and into talking about these problems that you do now and helping young men? I know we touched on it briefly at the beginning, but clearly there's that story within your own life where there were lots of pain points, and you use those pain points through potentially a healing process during that time as a firefighter to then almost full circle then go back to those young men to try and help them where they were at. So what was it that inspired that shift in a career in, what was it, like 2016, 2017?
Yeah, what are we on now, 2023? So a little bit more after I left the fire service. I was already personal training and I'd gone back to play rugby again as well, from 25 to 32. So 10 years ago I retired. And there was another 7 years of a lot of proving. Like it wasn't all dead and buried. There were still massive voids. Hence why my nose is all wonky and made of metal, and my jaw and my hand and my ankle. Going back to rugby for like another 7 years and breaking everything else to try and find validity. But I left the fire brigade just over 7 years ago, and I became an educator. So I became an educator and assessor, and I was teaching the personal training syllabus and strength and conditioning syllabus. And things started coming together for me. I was really looking at the world from a different angle and started going deeper on myself. And I met a guy who wanted me to teach for his company. And he said, I'll tell us your story, Rick. So I kind of told him, like all my life story, sporting achievements and all the rest of it. And he said to me then, this is 6-7 years ago, he said, you should be coaching. And I laughed. I said, coaching? What are you talking about? And he was like, life coaching or inspirational speaking. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, why is this inspirational? Like, just because I've been through all this, like, I've got myself through it. Like, you find ways. Why do I need to inspire anyone with this? Like, it's just what humans do, isn't it? And he's like, no. And he opened the door, the gateway for that. And I went on a big journey myself, went hypnotherapy. I had a bit of counselling. I did a lot of shadow work that really started to release and understand all of my voids and why they were there, how they were curated, how they were manifesting, and basically how I designed a whole life at that time of 20 odd years based on that first 14 years of belief system. And it was just like, oh, wow. This is crazy. I can't believe I've designed my whole life, my relationships with friends, family, women, like mates, everything. The people I'd brought in and why they were there was fascinating. Or why they was there and why things didn't work out, or what emotions were stirred, and et cetera, et cetera. And once I went on the coaching journey, I just started sitting there thinking, I just need to work with men. Like, there's so many men that I've constantly been around where I'm seeing me in them, or I'm seeing my little boy in them play out in different ways. And I need to start helping to teach them what I'm learning through my journey to help them. And what I try, I know it gets lost, but I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, and I don't want to be. I want to be really clear that what I want to do is get people from where they are now to where they want to be. And I think with comes that is, for me, I watched Stutz the other night. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Netflix. It's basically Jonah Hill and his therapist. And Stutz says, yeah, Jonah, you got to stop dumping all your shit on me, like laughing. But it made me laugh because I'm like, okay, therapy is when someone can unload and talk to someone, but coaching is different. Coaching is helping someone understand where they're at to get them to where they are. And I looked at that, I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do. Like, right now we have a challenge, and the challenge for me is, it's just understanding. Like, lads need to understand, young men need to understand why we are as we are, why what they've observing is there and what's going on around them. And I use the confused map of man, but I also let them understand what these four energies are: the king, the lover, the warrior, magician, what they represent in our life, because without understanding them, they can't read the message that's being put out there. There's a certain someone that talks about being a king and everything else, but he gives a message and he's not being the message. And when I speak to the boys, they're like, oh yeah, but you'd be a king. And I go, what's a king? And they think it's power. They think it's about success. I'm like, no. A king, the king in all of us, is the part of us that has clarity, that has order, that has purpose. He's joyous, he's compassionate, he's empathetic, he's inclusive. The king is the part of us that also is loving and vulnerable and giving. And you see them go, oh my God, what? You see their faces just suddenly go, why does no one tell us this? Why does social media and the people on there think that being a king's about money and planes and Lamborghinis and bossing people around and power? And I'm like, no. Like, this is what being a king is. And you have a warrior inside of us. This is all about action, discipline, and boundaries. And the king says, right, this is my purpose. And I inform my inner warrior that this is where I want to go. I've got clarity. I've got order in my life around my mission. I need to inform you to take the action on that and be disciplined with where we're going. And with that, we have the lover energy, which is all about removing boundaries and being playful and creation, which feeds the magician or the mystic inside of us, which is all about knowledge and transformation. And that's all part of us, Zach. Like, it's all part of the male psyche, which informs each other all the time. And one of the questions the boy asks is, yeah, but how do I find purpose? And I said to them, purpose could be just concentrating on your mocks the next 8 weeks. That's all purpose has ever got to be. Purpose can only ever be what's right in front of us. Because otherwise it becomes massive. It becomes daunting. It becomes anxiety-inducing if you think you haven't got purpose. But again, we live in a world where we've got purpose coaches. And I'm like, you know what? Again, we're doing the same story. We're coaches trying to tell people we're enlightened to help others, but we're just trying to profiteer again off of each other. And like I say to the boys, your purpose right now, this is a talk I gave on Thursday night, it's just to concentrate on mocks. Then we work from that. Okay, I need clarity. Brilliant. Clarity is these mocks. That's my purpose. Brilliant. What order do I need? Okay, I need to start sitting down and figuring out what's my timetable look like. And then that's where I come in, where I look at this and like, I wish I got taught what I know, which is where I come in with the boys, is we work for all this. We use masculinity as the vehicle, help them understand all this. And then for us to go to the next level, it's all around, my talks are all around inner drivers, like values, attention surplus, attention deficit. So I help them understand their own learning models. I help them understand why you have attention deficit in one area, why you have attention surplus in another, what it represents for you as an individual. And then we lean that into habits. So identity, I'm big on identity. So we build all these foundations for them through my workshops, my work with them. And then what we're able to do is us to really come down then to go, what are the outcomes from the purpose, from our king energy? Well, if it's this, let's dive into your identity. Who would you surround? If you want them outcomes, before we put systems and processes in place, because we're great for that as humans. We're like, oh, I want to lose 3 stone. Brilliant. I go to gym 5 days a week. So we put the system in place, we go, and we lose the identity, because after a little while, what we haven't changed is all the things that make up the heart of us, which is the questions like, okay, well, who do I surround myself with? Who do I surround myself with? What environments does the person who creates them outcomes, where does he go to? What books would he read? What podcast was he listen to? Was he willing to cut away from his life? What would he introduce to his life? What time would he go to bed? How much sleep does he get? What food would he introduce into his diet? So all these things formulate the identity of the person that creates the outcomes. From that place of identity, you can then create the systems. And this is what I tell the boys, or work with the boys on, because now you're that person already. So you've suddenly put light on the brain of the person that achieves the outcome. So now you come from a position of power, self-awareness, to put the systems in place that serve the outcome.
I think what has been clear from your answer there is the deep introspective work that you were able to do that then enabled you to reflect on each step in your own life that then you can simplify and break down and package up and then deliver to these people, to these young men, at a time when they can benefit from it the most and that they don't have to make as many mistakes. Of course, mistakes are necessary for all of us in some ways. I mean, I saw on one of the posts you mentioned that it can be too easy to get caught up in consuming too much self-development content and consuming too many podcasts and not taking action. And I think there is that risk as well. But what I really liked is particularly when you said you could see yourself in other men, and you can see, you can recognize the traits that you've worked so hard through introspection to recognize and understand. And then because you can see them in other people, and I'd say it's the exact same for me. You know, when I recognize something that someone's doing that I don't like, or I do like, I can always trace it back to because I know deep down that I've been guilty of doing that either before or currently, or continuing to do. So I think having that self-awareness, as you picked up on quite nicely, is the catalyst for then being able to go on to do all these things. Because if you don't know yourself, then you're never going to be able to formulate that vision, formulate that plan, break it down, and exactly as you described there, sort of see yourself doing those things that you know you need to do, you know, cutting back on things you might not want to cut back on. And I think, yeah, that's just a kind of a summary of that, is that the importance of introspection. And obviously the name of this podcast, Ex-professional, is then me understanding, for example, yourself talking about these things. And that's what I find really interesting as well. I don't want to dwell on this point too much because, of course, it's been spoken about like so much in the last few months, and this particular individual that you've mentioned a couple of times. But of course, because it is culturally at the tipping point at the moment, what I see of Mr. AT is a relatively accurate diagnosis, but a terrible prescription. So he's been able to identify certain pain points and understand things that are going on in society where he has some good takes. Yes, of course, he has some bad takes. But then in response to that kind of diagnosis of what's going on, what he then prescribes, what he then suggests, and then who he is himself is not a very good example of what men should aspire to be. Because he misses out on so many important factors of masculinity in serving others, in not being materialistic, in not seeing yourself as this powerful and kind of having other people below you working for you, if that makes sense. Like, I think that's just something I wanted to very briefly kind of clarify and touch on, because he is obviously, and people like him are dominating the male space online, and young impressionable men who are 13, 14, 15, 16, etc., even people, in their early 20s, everyone is affected by this kind of message. And I see it as the idea that there's that void in society that is being filled by people like him. And then the work that you're doing is going, hang on a second, like, yes, there's a reason why there's been that void, but this isn't the correct jigsaw puzzle that's going to fit here. Like, this is going to cause more hurt in other directions. And I think that actually does almost relate back to what you were saying initially with that whole kind of man's map kind of journey. Actually, kind of spinning off the back of some of the things that this individual shares, just as general topics. I saw on a post you mentioned about dating that women don't want Mr. Nice Guy, and Jordan Peterson does mention, you should be capable of violence and keep it under control. And what I like about Peterson's take on this is that he studies these archetypes and he studies these kind of general stories that guide our lives. And one of the things he says is that archetype of Beauty and the Beast, and the fact that this man, he's not a nice guy. He is kind of a little bit rough around the edges, but he's serving and loving and understanding. So how do you think men should seek to tame this and sort of like strike that balance? Because, as much as we can talk about culture-wide issues, I think in the world of dating and relationships, especially as young boys grow into being men, it's a primary motivator. It can be a primary source of pain. It can cause hurt. So just on this topic, how should men kind of strike that balance in relationships and dating?
I think, and how I see that, the word that comes thrown up for me when I use that is it's all about capability. We talk about dangerous and we talk about wild, and like I even used to run an event called the Untamed Man, because how I see this, and I'm very in alignment with Jordan Peterson on this, is domestication. We've grown up in a world where it's like, oh, he's a good boy. He can do as he's told. He can do this. He can look after himself. He can wash his clothes. What a good boy. He can operate a washing machine. What a good boy. Oh, do you go and do your like good boy. It reminds me of being a freaking dog, Zach. And I kind of come to the analogy, I give this to the boys, and it's almost like a moment. We celebrate a dog, right? We think we can control a dog, and that's why we celebrate it. And we think a dog's a safe pet. A dog's a really toxic, dangerous pet because we've domesticated it. So if we look at wolves, for instance, we think they're these wild beasts, right? But if you take a dog off a lead, what does it do? It literally walks in zigzags everywhere, peeing in one place, going for number two somewhere else, sniffing over there, sniffing this, but it literally is all over the place. What if you watch a pack of wolves move together, they operate in one straight line. Yeah, we're made to believe they're wild. And we're made to believe that what does wild mean as a man? Reckless, unpredictable, party animal, directionless. That's what we're made to believe. When really, it's the complete opposite. To be wild or dangerous comes down to control. We're made to believe that wild and dangerous means you can't be, basically what it means is you can't be controlled. Because to be wild and dangerous actually means you have direction. You know where you're going, and you will violently defend where you're going and put strong boundaries around it and won't be told what to do because you're on a mission. So all your energy is driven into that mission. And most of the time, because you're so passionate and clear about what that is, you cannot be manipulated or controlled. And we've been brought up to be devised from that. So that means because you cannot be controlled, you don't fit in, you're the black sheep. So you must be wild. We'll outcast you and we'll convince everyone that you're the outcast, that you're reckless and uncontrollable and unpredictable. What we got though is we basically live in a generation of men and boys who are dogs, put on a lead, taken off, we've got no idea where to be, what to do, what direction to go in. We become lost. So really, what Jordan Peterson's alluding to then, and I totally agree with this, is we need to encourage being more wild, not being tamed. And what we're trying to say here, and what my response to that post was, is just becoming more capable. When we look for things to be more capable in, like I'm rubbish with my hands, Zach. So like I'll go away and see my friend who's a bushcraftsman because I'm shocking. If anyone does anyone puts shelves up in our house, it's more likely to be my wife than me. And what it does is the longer I leave that to happen, I feel embarrassed. I feel a bit ashamed that I'm rubbish with my hands. And the longer it goes on, the more it manifests. And it's about recognizing them feelings and going, yeah, do you know what? Rather than live with the embarrassment and shame, why not I can share that? Like, where's other men? Can I speak to my friends and say, I'm so bad at my hands? Are you? Brings vulnerability, helps build relationship. With that comes, yeah, I can help you. Voila. What do you get then? Supportive friend, love, nurture, true leadership. You have a friend then that feels purposeful. At best. At worst, a friend goes, no, you're an embarrassment. Okay, brilliant. I've learned about you. I'll cut you away. Done. Like, I just look at it like that. And it's like stepping out yourself, not asking for help. Go to someone that knows something that you don't, you recognize it, and go and become more capable at it. Like I'm about to start beavers with my 8-year-old. And I'm like, yeah, I can't wait because I'm going to be able to go, I can go and grow with him. He's going to get the skills that my dad never gave me at 8 years old, survival skills, how to connect to the wild, how to make a fire, how to put cover over my head in nature to survive. And I'm like, yeah, brilliant. I'm going to get to learn this as well. This is awesome. I'll be around other dads that I'm going to be able to fail with, but also ask for help. But it allows me to feel more capable within myself. With more capability comes a greater sense of well-being. It also brings a greater sense of belonging in my own environment, my family home. My take on it is what I say to the boys is we just need to be more capable. And that's not being capable in a bad way. It's putting your hand up and going, yeah, I don't know something, but I do want to know it. You know, I do feel a sense of like guilt or a bit of shame that I don't know that, and I want to get rid of that rather than it turn into anger. Because I recognise that in myself, Zach. Like the longer I've left it with my own wife, it starts becoming angry, and I'll have to take myself to the gym and I put this angry music on in my earphones, and I'll start clanging weight around, thinking, oh, this will fix my problem, and I'll feel good after. And like I said to guys I've worked with, if you had a therapist and you went and saw them every day for 3 years and you're still going to see that therapist, what's the likelihood of you sacking them because it doesn't work? They're going, yeah, they'll be out the door. I'm like, right, you've been going to the gym every day for 3 years because you're telling me that it's your outlet. You're still here every day for 3 years. Do you think this is working? And they go, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's the same thing as therapy. Like, you're not addressing the real issue. Mm-hmm. So, and I look at it like that. Like we all know it's a real issue. Let's hit it head on. Yeah, let's talk and share.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think we often mask our vulnerabilities through those coping mechanisms, and people can justify that they're kind of fighting their demons in the gym, and exactly as you say, they'll put like heavy metal on, put the headphones on, and I think, in fairness, if it's not used too much as a coping mechanism, of course it's a healthy habit, as with anything, but as with anything, it can become an idol, it can become an unhealthy outlet and a coping mechanism. And I really like the way that you kind of touched on male vulnerability there, but especially between men, in kind of acknowledging your own weaknesses and that being a good thing, because then that provides opportunity for collaboration and to build deeper trust. And that's something that I've very much appreciated with the kind of close male friends that I've had growing through college into where I am now, that we kind of stayed in touch, is because you have that closeness and trust, and we all recognize that there are areas where we are better than others, and we just lean on those strengths. So I think vulnerability, and I'm glad it's kind of come to a head on this topic of male kind of masculinity and vulnerability, because I think it's one of the biggest points where currently people see themselves as like, if they're masculine, they don't show weakness, especially in the world of dating relationships. It's like there's no room for vulnerability or weakness or any of those kind of things, because we want to be these macho men and be super alpha, for example. So how do you even, if you've assumed that identity and assumed that kind of trait, how do you go about approaching vulnerability as a young man? Not only in between friends, but I think also in relationships, it can be quite hard knowing when to be vulnerable and when to be that kind of courageous leader where you don't show that, you know what I mean? Like there's that kind of nuanced balance there, I feel.
Yeah, do you know what? This is a really challenging subject, Zach, for me entirely. Like some of the things the boys have said when I go into the schools, and I remember I only consult, so I don't get a bigger picture, but some of them shared them in the last couple of weeks. They're even scared to go and say to some of the females in the school that they think they're attractive, or are like, you know, we have a real good laugh together and I really find you attractive. Can we go out for a coffee? And they say they want to say that, but they're so scared because they've been so shamed into thinking that they can't go and do that to a female because the message in the world is, how dare you look at me and find me attractive? I'm actually a person, not just a body. Like, because the message is coming across like that with the feminine movement. And it's like, this isn't helping anyone. The same as the message with boys isn't helping anyone. You know, like that's the way the world is. You can't send a message and not be the message. So if you're going to send that message and then say, for instance, like the first part of our brain is all about survival and reproduction. So like that's the wake up of the human brain by its pure base. Hence, so by that means that somewhere deeply in our mindset, we want to eat and drink and have sex. So that's never leaving. It's a primal part. It's the reason why, it's the whole start of why we're on this earth.
If we didn't have it, we literally wouldn't continue the human race.
We wouldn't have a species. And then we give a message saying, yeah, don't tell me I look attractive. How dare you compliment me and say something nice to me for us to come together to fulfill potentially our most basic human need. And then at the same time we go, yeah, it's okay for me to walk around in bikinis and I should be allowed to go on social networks in a top and not be commenting that my boobs are hanging out, or guys shouldn't be going shirtless on there because of what the opposite sex think. It's like, well, hold on a minute. Like, are we going to be a message here, or are we going to be congruent with this, or we're not? Like, we can't play into manipulating something on a basic human need, reproduction, which gets people the money they want through manipulation, the work they're doing, and then throw it in everyone's face whilst playing that role. Like, none of that makes sense, which is where the confusion comes from. And no, this hasn't answered the question at all, Zach. But something that the boys, it's a big challenge. But I'm really working hard. Because if I'm honest, I'm navigating myself the route with boys around this. With men, it's been a bit easier. So clients I worked with recently, I've said, you know, they're on dating apps. And I say to them, look, have you not tried Eventbrite? And they say, what are you talking about? And I say, well, think of it like this. You go on Eventbrite to go to something of interest, right? And they're like, yeah. So as an example, I had a client who loved Japanese food and he wanted to learn it. Yeah, he's on Tinder and everything else. And he can't find a date, hold down a relationship for like 5 years. So I said, what about Eventbrite? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, let's find somewhere where you can go to a Japanese cooking class. Yeah, but how's that working with dating, Rick? I said, because at the moment, you're observing an app that's full of people trying to impress people through their own lack of self-worth to be with someone because they have a huge void in being alone. If you go to a Japanese cooking class, you're going to go somewhere where you can be vulnerable because you're going somewhere to learn something you don't know something about. You're going to connect with people who are exactly the same interests, same level of vulnerability, but who want to explore and learn, which means you're going to build rapport better in a natural state rather than trying to meet at a pub or somewhere else face to face. You're both going to be vulnerable in a learning, creative environment where you can build rapport better because you have value in the fact that you can use your hands to learn this, and you're associating it with something like food, which is what makes people most happy because it's a survival mechanism deep in our brain. And he was like, oh my God, I've never thought of it like this. And I'm like, there you go, give it a go. We tried it on him. He's been in the relationship now for 2 years. I think he met like a woman there. They got on really well, introduced, like they went out as friendship groups. He met someone through a friendship group. And I said to him, why are you surprised? You met someone with commonality, which means her friends are going to have commonality with her. So even at best, you meet them there. At worst, you make new connections. And somewhere within the connections, you're going to have people around you of commonality where you'll meet people off of that. So like we've had success with him, and I've used that analogy of so many people, and they're like, even if they don't romantically meet someone, they meet friendships where they don't even need these apps anymore because they realize they're in contact with people and they're experiencing real relationships while they build their real self, and they get the voids filled of connection through authentic relationships rather than trying to pretend to be something with the pressure of the app.
I think the modern world gives us just fake versions of everything we truly deep down desire. And whilst I could go off on a whole tangent about that, I think this whole kind of dichotomy between Tinder and dating in real life, and how supposedly it's a smaller portion of men getting a more and more large portion of the women, that then promotes hedonistic short-term pleasure seeking over long-term intimate connections. And I think it's just really sad, and I think it'd be fantastic to encourage more men to. And I mean, this is what I'd like to do. You know, meet someone organically, and I've been in relationships in the past. And I think moving forward, it's that thing, tying it all back to what you mentioned earlier about, above all, finding that purpose and that direction and that road to kind of travel down to serve something above yourself, and then hopefully through that process, you know, when someone does come along, meeting them organically. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think we could talk for hours about this sort of topics, which is fantastic. And I think there's such a need for this kind of conversation in the public space, and maybe there's lots more topics we could discuss. But I'm sure you'll continue to discuss them on your LinkedIn and with your speaking and outlets such as that. So, if people do want to get in touch with yourself and follow what you're doing, how can they do so?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. So LinkedIn's my only social media platform. I'm a big believer in that, like, energy and attention isn't infinite. So we have to be really, really conscious of where we give it and where we spend it. So LinkedIn's my only social media. It's just Rick Cooper. And my website is www.rick-cooper.com, where you'll see, you know, I could do a lot of consultancy work at independent schools and one-to-one. I'm lucky enough to run CPD for teachers and house parents and senior leadership teams now around all these subjects. So, yeah, find me on there, and happy to go anywhere around the country. Thankfully, Zach, it's really hit off the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks, where I go to Leicester, I think, in a couple of weeks. I'm in Brighton. So all around Sussex, I'm managing to get this message out. And we get inquiries now from Leicester and 2 private schools in Yorkshire and 1 in Scotland. So it's going to be, it's good. It's really encouraging to hear that people are really opening their eyes to want to get this message into the younger generation.
I mean, it's a hot topic, and that's why I invited you on, because I think this sort of conversation today hopefully has opened a few conversations from people after they've listened to this podcast, and they can go away and talk to about these topics with their friends. And yeah, opening that conversation, I think, is super important, and developing what it means to be a healthy man and a good view of masculinity. So Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Rick, for your time today.
Thanks, Zach. I'm absolutely grateful for you, mate. Thank you very much, brother.